Hello everyone, welcome to the Young and Black webinar. Today we'll be discussing Black identity in rural spaces. Thank you so much for joining us and our amazing panel. Just a brief intro, so I'm from UK Youth, which is a leading national youth organisation which works across the UK to ensure that young people are equipped to thrive at every point within their lives. We do this through programmes, resources and support through the UK Youth Movement, which is youth organisations who are a part of our network. We have over 7,000 youth organisations within this network, reaching 1.6 million young people. UK Youth launched the Young and Black campaign in summer to ensure that we are highlighting the lived experience of young and Black individuals within the UK. Our webinar series has been to empower and enhance Black excellence and Black voices. Today's webinar will be around Black identity and Black lived experience within rural spaces. I will not take up any more time and I will hand it over to Lanai, who's going to be hosting the conversation.
Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined today. My name is Lanai. I am a volunteer for the charity Volunteering Matters based in Ipswich. I'm a #IWill ambassador for Youth Social Action, a research assistant at the Uni of Suffolk, and I've just started my children's nursing degree. So I'm going to pass over to Amon to introduce himself.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Amon. I work for a company called AIGSAF. We're a youth-based charity operating out of Slough. We were brought together based on conflict that was happening between young Asian males in about '98, and now obviously the demographic has changed a little bit. But I go into schools and teach on identity, racism, anything that really a school needs. We go in and we do subjects like that. Thank you.
Lauren.
Who's next? Hello.
Hi guys, my name's Lauren. I'm from Oxford. I was born and raised in Oxford. I'm currently a student at college studying travel and tourism, which is a great subject to be studying right now while no one's traveling. But yeah, and I'm really excited for this.
Fantastic.
Delapo.
Hi everyone, my name is Delapo. I'm 29 years old and I'm currently based in Toronto, Canada. I grew up in Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Kent within the United Kingdom. So I'm very excited to be here for this conversation and looking forward to hearing the life stories of everybody on the call.
Perfect.
Anjali.
Yeah.
Me next?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you call my name. Hi everybody, my name is Anjali Sweeney. I'm a youth and community work manager from Manchester, and I'm also a director of a small micro entity in Manchester called the African Pot. And we work to alleviate social exclusion for African diasporic people in Manchester, UK and globally. Pleasure to meet you all.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to kick off with the first question, which is, what was your experience growing up in rural spaces?
I go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. All right. So yeah, okay. So I grew up in Windsor. Very few, I go from few to none Black people around. But I would say that my upbringing was really quite positive. I had a very good childhood. My parents came to the UK from Ghana in 1971, and they came with occupations, but they weren't recognised too much here. So they ultimately ended up in nursing and spent X amount of years going as high as they could. My dad ended up being senior lecturer at a university teaching nursing. I think when I look back on my childhood, it's filled with a lot of positivity. I think I was fortunate. I think growing up, looking back, I'm aware that I was very fortunate. I didn't go through the kind of blatant racism that lots of people might express. I kind of became a bit of a celebrity within my community and everyone wanted to be my friend. So I was very fortunate in that sense. I think a bit later on, I'll probably explain a bit better, but I realized probably from the time that George Floyd was murdered, started to evaluate a lot of all the things that I did in my life to be liked, and realized that I probably did a lot of those things in order to just be accepted. But I didn't really realize at the time. I smile a lot. I'm very open. I'm kind of welcoming. And when I look back, I think a lot of those things were done in order to try and avoid any potential problems. And I was successful in that sense, but I've had to reflect and think what was the cost for that? So, but nonetheless, I won't take up too much time. I'll move on. But yeah, grew up in Windsor, and I now work in Slough, which is literally a few miles away. So they're two different worlds, but very, very close. But yeah, thank you.
I'll follow on from Amon. So as I said before, I was born in Hertfordshire, and at the age of maybe 8 or 9, we moved to Bedfordshire into a very small village called Lower Stondon, which had, I guess, a few hundred people in it. Not many Black people whatsoever. In fact, I think that we were the only Black family there. And yeah, I would say again that overall, my childhood, at least at that particular point in my life, was very positive. I had a great family, and my parents definitely tried to give me the best kind of upbringing and the best opportunities that they were able to. And I always say that with regards to the time, I guess I was in Bedfordshire from the ages of maybe 8 or 9 to around 14. Whilst I didn't experience any overt cases of racism, there were more, I think it was more important in terms of how I began to see myself. It was always very apparent to me that I was different from everybody else. And like Amon was saying, I came up with all kinds of different mechanisms to kind of feel more included, right? So I'm sure we'll get more into this as the conversation develops, but a great example of this is my name. So obviously my name is Delapo. That's my birth certificate or my passport. It's what my parents named me when I was born. But from when we moved to Bedfordshire when I was like 8 or 9, I felt, because as I said, I was the only Black person in the class, in the school, I very much wanted to have an English name. And so from an early age, the name that I was able to get was Andrew, which was the name of my mother's father. So, I asked my mom, can I have an English name? And she was like, okay, the only name that you can have is what my grandfather was called. So basically from the ages of 8 or 9 till 28, so basically last year when I came to Canada, everybody that I introduced myself to, I would call myself Andrew. And it was only really when I came to Toronto last year that I suddenly just thought, you know what, for all of the love and respect that I do have for my grandfather and all the rest of it, I wanted to reclaim, I guess, a bit of who I was in terms of my actual identity. So yeah, as I said, I'm sure we'll get into more of this kind of topic as the conversation goes on, but there were definitely parts of my upbringing that shaped me in a way that it was only as an adult that I was able to reflect upon it and look back and say, actually, this wasn't the best thing to do. So I'll leave it there.
Lauren, do you want to go next?
Sure. So for me, I would say that my childhood, my upbringing was like, my home life was really good. I wouldn't change a thing about it. But I think more the problems became from when I was at school. Right from the beginning of primary school. So I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. So for a lot of the time that I was in primary school, she was on like the older years, like year 5, year 6, and then she left, and I was the only Black kid in the school. And then when I was in secondary, she left when I started, so it was the whole thing all over again. So from being in an all-white school, it definitely made me question things, like in terms of the way that I looked, that I feel like I shouldn't have been questioning at such a young age. And I think it mainly was because from seeing the people around me, they became the standard of beauty that I saw. And so I really tried to fit in. I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to stand out. You know, I tried everything to fit in, and, you know, God save my hair, it was burnt to a crisp trying to straighten it down every day. But yeah, so with my home life, it was great, you know, playing on the streets every day, you know, coming in, trying to sneak a ice pop out the door that your mum's seeing, you know. And yeah, so other than that, I say it was really good, but it was just then went through this year that I realised that a lot of the problems started from school, and I think that is definitely a really big problem that we're facing now.
So my childhood, I'm Manchester born and bred, born and raised. Was born in Manny, as we call it, and yeah, I pretty much knew from a very early age that I was Black. The minute I could kind of like can't even say the word, but intellectualize it, I kind of, you know, I was Black. Went to a primary school where there was other Black kids there. There was a mix of diverse children at that school. We knew we were different. I can't remember facing any, if you want to call it overt racism. There was probably some subtle racism going on, and there was probably some kind of like biases from the teachers, and we were probably treated differently because of it, but I can't remember, if that makes sense. It was only when I moved to a part of Manchester called Wythenshawe, which is South Manchester, which was one of the largest housing estates in Europe. It's predominantly white working class, that I kind of encountered racism for the first time, playing with my sister outside, as we used to do alongside with my mum, and having a neighbour and his children basically say, oh, you know, don't play with them, get in the house, that type of thing. I won't go too much into it, but that was the first time I thought, Went to high school, and again, had Black friends, there were Black people in the class. So again, was quite aware, if you want to call it, of my race, even though I don't like to use that word. And it was only when I went to university at 18, and I went to Preston, which is about 40 miles down the road from Manchester. It's a completely different world. At the time in 97, it was still a town. It's now a city. And I was pretty much the only Black in my class, if you want to call it. And yeah, I got a lot of overt and covert racism from teachers, from tutors, from people in the class. And yeah, it was peak times, as they call it. It was a lot. Got back to Manchester, and yeah, just started the fight from then, really. And clearly the business that I've got pretty much speaks to it. I'm in the struggle. I'm about this life. I'm an activist. Yeah, so that's me.
Thanks to all of you. For me, I was born in London, but my family decided to move to a small town, Ipswich in Suffolk, when I was still very young. And Ipswich is actually considered to be one of the most diverse towns in Suffolk. So we have 50 different languages, and it is quite a diverse town. But when you're in school, sometimes it can feel very white, and I definitely faced a lot of different struggles in school, which now that I've left, I'm able to reflect on and kind of can really relate to some of those you said. So I'm sure we'll go into more detail about our experience in education later. But yeah, again, very fortunate to have parents that supported me and empowered me to feel good about my African heritage, which I'm so proud of, but was made to feel that that was something to be ashamed of in most of my adolescence. So yeah, I think we will move on to the next question, which is, do you think rural spaces are racist or promote racism?
I can speak a bit to that. The experience that I had of growing up in a rural space in Bedfordshire was that, to the extent that there was racism, it was covert. So I remember there was a particular experience, for example, that my younger sister had when she was about 5 years old, where there was it was her birthday, and she invited people, and nobody basically came. And obviously, this kind of example is something where, at the time, our suspicions were maybe it's because she's different, she's Black, but it's obviously, you can never prove it, right? It's always there's always plausible deniability and all the rest of it. I would definitely say that in terms of race in general, particularly in Bedfordshire, it would be more, I guess it would be more self-inflicted. It was like, I think Amon was making the point earlier that when you're growing up in this kind of space, you want to fit in with other people. So in my experience, for example, when I was at school or when I was with my friends, I always wanted it to be apparent that I was Andrew, quote unquote, and I wasn't like the typical stereotypes that they would have of people who grew up in Africa or anything else, right? So I guess it kind of ties in with the question of identity, because at that particular time in my life, I'm very, to be completely honest, I would have felt more comfortable in an environment filled with white people than with Black people, just because that was all I knew. I would definitely say that in terms of racism, it became a lot more overt when I later, at the age of 14, moved to Kent. And there we had a lot of, I guess, what you'd call racial banter, which is where, supposed friends would say basically racist things, and you would just have to laugh it off. And again, that was an environment in which we were the only Black people really in the location. But yeah, I would definitely say in Bedfordshire, it was strange, because on the one hand, I as I said at the beginning, I had a great childhood, I had great friends and all the rest of it. But I definitely think, looking back, that on top of the covert racism that my sisters faced, that I faced, and all the rest of it, looking back, that particular point in my life really had an impact on me, just in terms of how I saw myself, obviously the name that I took, how I saw myself with regards in comparison to where I was from. And it really was only really after university when I actually started working in London, and I had what I like to call my racial awakening, that I really kind of moved beyond that. Yeah, that's my response.
I was just going to say, I think that what you've touched upon there is, I think there's definitely a difference between growing up in a rural space and visiting a rural space, because where I grew up in Manchester, and Manchester is classed as an urban space, if that makes sense. So for me, I'm representing Black Girls Hike as well. And I joined Black Girls Hike when it was started in 2019, just January actually. So yeah, not even a year yet, I think. And before that, I can't remember really visiting rural spaces of my own volition, unless I went with like school or college, for some type of trip, or we went to like a park or something, a national park. It wasn't something where I said, yeah, let me go and visit a rural space. So I definitely think there's a difference growing up in that space and visiting that space. And for me, the massive difference is around ownership and recognizing that space is for us to visit as well. And going back to your point about our rural spaces racist, I think there was something that came out, the National Trust and the links to slavery. I don't know if people have heard about that, but in that respect, then yeah, a lot of the rural spaces that we find in England and Wales, et cetera, are inherently racist because of those links. But I guess it changes the picture depending on if you grew up in that space, if you visit that space. So yeah.
Good point. Shall I go in? Okay, so yeah, I think when I was listening to your question, I was kind of thinking that the actual area itself is just areas, the people in it. And I think my own personal experience was primarily everybody that I knew us as a family. It wasn't difficult, given that there wasn't any other Black people around. I've got an older brother as well, and so his generation knew him, and therefore I kind of had a passage through because people already knew us. My experience was that I never really had to hide being Black or being African. I would constantly wear kente shirts. Even the group of people that became sort of my inner circle, they were into Nirvana and Nine Inch Nails, and they were grungers. And I brought the element of hip hop to them, and they embraced that. And we kind of just lived this life where everybody embraced everyone's cultures. I was quite fortunate that within my group of friends, we had people that were half Indian, half English, half Yugoslavian, half Kenyan. It wasn't extremely diverse, but it was diverse enough for me. And I think that, you know, I really would thank those people that were my defenders. I don't think I ever had a situation where people were rude to me or anything. If they had, there would have been a whole load of people after them. And so it was very fortunate. Also, Delapo, you mentioned about your name. So my name's Niamon, N-I-I, and then A-M-O-N. I had that whole experience where people couldn't say my name, found it really difficult. And I've now shortened my name to Amon, and that's how everybody knows me. There's even official documents that have that. And there's an element of me that, you know, I'd like to reclaim my name in some aspects. I have some of my handles have my full name on there, but I'm known as Amon, and therefore I've just gone with it. But I didn't have a problem identifying who I was. My parents were very pro-Black. I recall sitting around on the sofa and the news would come on and the headline would be someone who's been mugged. And we'd all sort of collectively be praying that the person who'd done it wasn't Black. And it was just, I kind of found that I almost carried the weight of every Black person in the world on my own shoulders. Every person that I interacted with, I kind of wanted them to have a good impression of Black people, particularly Black men. And I don't know how conscious I was at the time, but I knew that the stereotypes were what everybody saw. And I thought, I don't fit into those stereotypes. I'm not a criminal. You know, I've got hardworking parents that were doing everything they could to try and give us the best life. I'll probably go into it a bit later on, but there was an element of being embarrassed that we lived somewhere relatively decent, that we spoke well. You know, there was elements that it wasn't Black to speak English correctly, or to have gone to a decent school and done well in your GCSEs and stuff. So there was lots of conflict, I'd say, that went on. But obviously it happens over a long period of time. So it wasn't like a load of chaos at the same time. It was just over a long period of time trying to establish who we were. And I think we did all right in the sense that we survived living in a totally white dominated area, and we came out of it. And my brother and myself, we're both on the scene, I guess, trying to do what we can to uplift Black people. And I'm supported by the fact that I work for an organization that also does everything it can to reduce and remove racism and to bring enlightenment to people. So I definitely consider myself relatively lucky. There's lots of little isms and schisms I could talk about, but on the whole, if I looked at my life as a whole, I've been very fortunate. Yeah.
Being from the area that I live in, it's mainly elderly people. So it was, I don't know if I would straight up say it was racism, but it was more casual. And you know, some could argue that's because they're another generation, you know, those kind of things that they've been taught from their parents and their grandparents. But it's been a struggle, because I've been working recently with the youth workers in my area, and it's been a struggle trying to find some more like Black people and Asian people in this area, because it really, in the specific area I'm in, it's me and my sister. I think a couple years ago, I think I saw another Black kid, but I might have made that up. I'm not fully convinced that was real. But it's a lot of the time, especially secondary school, I would say, they didn't really give you the opportunity to connect with where you come from. It was more the majority, so that's what we're going to focus on. So there's more things you have to learn yourself. If you want to connect with your roots, you got to learn that yourself. And it wasn't until last year that I was in touch more with my family, you know, like great aunties and I was speaking to them a lot, and it just made me realize, like, I in a way I felt kind of sad that I'd missed out on a lot of that, and I'd kind of purposely pushed it away because I didn't want to be part of that. I didn't want to be known as part of that. And then I learned to just embrace it more, let everyone know like where I come from. And I remember the biggest point was when I went to prom, and everyone was like, "Oh, what dress are you gonna wear?" No, I'm not telling you, you'll find out. And originally, I'll be honest, I was planning on like the same kind of dress everyone was gonna wear, but then I showed up on the day in a dashiki dress, and I was like, I'm ready. So it's a lot more having to find that yourself. And even the other day I was thinking about how I had to have multiple conversations with like head teachers and head of departments just to be able to wear a headscarf to school, because my head teacher was concerned that people would bully me for wearing a headscarf. And I was just thinking, like, if you know that's going to be the outcome of it, then surely there's some kind of issue here that needs to be resolved to prevent this, you know? So yeah, it's definitely something I've had to do myself. But in terms of, again, where I live, I let a lot of things slide that I shouldn't have due to not being educated on these things myself, and not knowing, was that something racist? Was it just, them not being educated on something? Was it just an honest question? Yeah. But then as well, as I got older, more in secondary school, was when I started seeing like, okay, that was racist. That wasn't just you being rude. That's more of a deep issue here. And it comes with more like when I go into town with my friends. I remember a specific time when I went into town with my friends. There was about 6 or 7 of us, and one of the other kids was Filipino, the other were white British. And we went into a shop, and as we were leaving, I was stopped and searched by one of the employees. And I was just really mad at that point, because I'm like, why am I the only one being searched? Like, everyone else has a bag, everyone else has a backpack. Why is it just me? So we then went back to complain, and I'd realized that where this whole thing was going on, there was a security camera looking directly at the whole situation. Then when we went back to complain, and I told them exactly where it was, exactly what time it happened, and someone went to go check the footage, come back, oh, there's nothing showing that. Okay, so either you need to check your cameras or someone's not telling the truth, you know? So I definitely think that I wouldn't say that it's more racist where I live. It is just more, people get a bit excited, you know what I mean? Like something different, you know, we're gonna get excited. I think that's more what it was.
Wow, it's weird that you say that. Sorry to cut you. I was just going to say that your experience there, Lauren, that you're speaking about, that's something that I've experienced really like every other month of my adult life. And I don't know if it's because I'm living in a built-up urban area, or, you know, because there's more Black people in Manchester, Greater Manchester, and there's a greater perception that there might be a threat or a thief or a criminal, etc. But yeah, that's interesting to hear.
Definitely. And I think there's this definite pressure, especially in rural areas, that we are representing our community, and therefore at all times we must uphold Black excellence. And actually, why aren't we just excellent being us normally? Why do we have to kind of be extra and work 10 times harder, as we're often told? And, you know, changing our names, who benefits from that? You know, it might be easier if we could find you a nickname. No, you need to learn how to pronounce my name correctly. And I'm just noticing that there's some questions. Thank you so much for sending them through. I think we will come to questions at the end, just because I think we will hopefully answer some of them throughout. And I think for me, the question of rural spaces is promoting racism. I think there's definitely big ignorance in rural areas. And I do believe in where I'm from, a lot of the white community are maybe from a kind of more middle class kind of world, and have great incomes, and therefore they have the privilege to operate in predominantly white spaces. And so for them, there's the attitude that doesn't happen around here. We don't have racism here, and trying to really minimize the racism that does exist because they are allowed to operate in their white circles exclusively. And I think in the Western world now, you know, there's Black literature freely available in libraries. Education is free and compulsory to everyone. Most households have some kind of internet or radio or TV access. And so for me, the excuse that, you know, my parents are just like that, that's how I've been raised, or we don't have you guys living in our spaces, it's not excusable. That is not a valid reason for you to continue racism, because there's so many opportunities to educate yourself now. And definitely when you were mentioning, Angeli, the Black Girls Hike,
yeah,
it kind of made me think about why aren't our communities kind of encouraged to experience nature, to explore the career of agriculture? You know, where are Black farmers, you know? And when we go to rural spaces, actually, do we even feel safe? I know for me, sometimes walking through villages, I feel like I'm in Get Out. You know, the pressure of neighbors out their window, and it's like, okay, like actually, I don't know if I feel comfortable taking a leisurely stroll in this area. So yeah, definitely.
I completely agree. I can tell you some stories. We've been on some hikes where, you know, other hikers have stopped us and said, so where are you from? And one girl said Oldham, and she was like, no, where are you from type of thing. And it's that. Then it's, you know, we've been stopped again by a lady who had a small dog, and she was walking along the path, and she expected the whole group to move to allow her and her small dog. And then she started abusing the group when that didn't happen. So it's this type of expectation. This is ours, what you're doing here. And then I think the last hike we went, a lady and a few of the ramblers were like, so where are you from? And, oh, there's a lot of yous, aren't there? I'm kind of like taken aback and almost threatened. I mean, there's so many different stories that we could tell. And I think the great thing about Black Girls Hike is when we do go out in nature and we do go hiking, we go there with our full selves. We laugh, we joke, we talk. You know how Black women are when they get together, particularly, and it's amazing. It's such a healing space where we can be ourselves, in fresh air, looking at amazing sights and scenery, sitting down and talking when we have breakouts and lunches and such, and just just really being out in nature. It's an amazing experience. It really, really is.
And how beneficial to your mental health and well-being, being able to explore nature, and the fact that it's kind of seen as an exclusively white activity needs to stop, because we need to get out in those spaces. And yeah, it's really, really important. So I think we'll move on to the next question, which is, do you think rural spaces affect Black identity?
I would definitely say yes. I would say that it's interesting because if I compare myself and my sisters with our cousins who grew up in Nigeria, for example, there's quite a big difference in terms of how we are. So the level of self-confidence, for example, that they have is something that they have naturally, is something that I had to work to get over many years. And I think that particularly, growing up in Bedfordshire and in rural spaces, it's almost as if you have the weight of having to grapple with defining the meaning of your race from a very early age. And I mean, I can think of examples, right? You know, you're at school, and for example, it's Martin Luther King Day, and everybody's turning around to look at you as if you were in the civil rights movement yourself. Or when you're talking about slavery, everyone turns around to look at you. And again, I think going back to a point that was made earlier, it's almost as though everybody else has an opinion as to what you should be like as a person.
Yeah.
And I can definitely say that as I grew older, when I got to be a teenager, for example, I can remember very clearly everybody saying, Andrew, you speak like a white person. What's
Yeah.
you have to, this is not how a black male should sound. You have to sound like, I don't know, somebody from
What
London.
should you sound like? Sorry to cut, but I hate that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't even know. I don't know how to answer that. I feel this is how I speak and all the rest of it. But at that particular time in my life, people felt that I sounded like a white person, and I can distinctly remember at the age of maybe 15, going home and printing out this enormous list of slang words from London. And my idea was, okay, I'm going to learn all of this so that I can appease all of these white people that I go to school with. But then obviously, fortunately, I realized that this was ridiculous. And from that age, I kind of just had a lot more confidence in myself as a black person and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, all of this to say really that I feel like in terms of identity issues, growing up in white spaces definitely has an impact on you. I can definitely say that it took me many years to, as I said, get the level of self-confidence that my cousins who grew up in Nigeria, where obviously everybody's black, they didn't really have to go through that whole kind of journey of who am I as a black person in a white dominated society? Is the way that I'm speaking okay? Is the way that I'm dressed okay? And it's actually with some regret because that I look back, because when I did go to university, for example, there was an Afro-Caribbean society. I did manage to to meet some wonderful black people at university, but at that particular point in my life, coming from a rural area of Bedfordshire and then also a white-dominated area in Kent, it was like a self-inflicted identity crisis in that although I met wonderful black people, the idea that I had at the time was that they all seemed to be from London, and here I was, this village boy basically. And I felt like, again, it was like the stories that or the taunts which had been leveled at me at the age of 15 in the sense of, oh, Andrew, you're too white, or you're too this, or you're too that. It was like in my mind, oh, they won't really like me, or they won't really accept me, even though they were lovely people. And it was really, as I said, only after I left university, when I started working in London and I just grew up basically, that I resolved those long-standing issues of identity, which had kind of bedeviled me for over a decade, really. So.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say, sorry, is anyone going to come in? For myself, I think from what Delapo was saying, I think there was an aspect of almost embarrassment coming from somewhere that was rural and didn't have many black people. And I think if I really reflect, the issues I probably got were from other black people, and similar to Delapo in terms of how I spoke. I think what was out there was, bear in mind, I grew up in the 70s, so I'm not even that young. But nonetheless, things were slightly different there. I think things were a bit more clear cut. The racists were over there and the sort of decent people over there. Nowadays, I find it's a little bit more mixed, and you don't know who's cool and who isn't. But my brother and myself, I think we had this element of seeing what we considered black culture, which ultimately would have been black American culture, and not really fitting the stereotype, but there being an expectation that we would be exactly like the people saw on telly or in movies. And I think we got to the point where we were almost embarrassed to say where we lived. And now reflecting on it, I think a lot of the stuff that we've discussed today, I only became aware of it once I'd done the reflection. So at the time, my black identity was that I was a black dude living in Windsor, and that was it. I was okay with that. And I realized as I grew up that that was my identity. It couldn't be anything else because I hadn't experienced anything else. I've never lived in London. So who I am is a product of my environment and my home life. My parents were very, like I said, they were very pro-black. They would, I think it was slightly easier for me because I had a homeland I could talk about. I had a very defined culture that was clear. My friends that were from the Caribbean, There was aspects of, you know, they'd gone through slavery, and there was elements of their identities being slightly eroded, and there's bits missing, whereas mine, I could trace all my grandparents back as far as I needed to and what have you. And so my experience was slightly different. And I don't think I had a problem at the time. It was only after looking back and thinking, I did that for that particular reason. And I definitely would say the carrying the weight of every Black person on my own shoulders was exhausting and probably unnecessary, but I think it was a technique or a strategy that I employed to try and be accepted, even though I didn't know it at the time. I think I didn't like the idea that people thought of us badly, and I shouldn't have really had to worry about that, but I did. And I don't necessarily regret it, but it was, you know, it's just little things. You mentioned, Anjali, about when Black women get together, and, you know, there's the idea that they're loud and what have you. And I remember just sort of trying to be quiet and trying to just get through life without causing too much upset to anybody. And yeah, it's quite sad. Even my own children now, I realize there's aspects of my childhood that I'm now replicating with them, and I have to check myself. You know, don't be too loud, don't scream and shout when you're in shops and things like that. And, I mean, they're probably normal things, but I'm aware that people are going to look at us differently because we're Black, and look at them being loud again. And so did it affect me? Yes, I think now looking back, definitely lots of things that were put in place in order to just get through. They weren't good. No one else had to do that, just me. And that was a lot of pressure for a child or a young teenager to have to try and represent everybody. And like you said, Black excellence. I don't know if I was always successful, but I certainly tried. And yeah, here I am now trying to encourage young people to just be themselves, whatever themselves is. I think definitely my last point was, with the kind of stereotype of what a Black person was, I think there's an aspect of trying to fill that role, but it not necessarily being right for you. I've never been to America, much less trying to be an African American. It would never work for me. So I just had to ultimately accept that I was a well-spoken Black guy who lived in a completely white dominated town. And once I accepted that, then I could be myself. Prior to that, I was trying to find who I might have been. And I think it was just the acceptance that I don't speak with patois. I don't, you know, I've got terrible language, don't get me wrong, but I don't walk around trying to be someone else. What you're seeing of me right now is who I am. And from once that was embarrassing, now it's just, I've accepted it. And if anyone meets me, they'll have to accept that as well. So I think the problems I faced generally came from other Black people who felt like I didn't fit the stereotype that they had in their own mind. It wasn't necessarily white people expecting me to be a particular way. We all spoke the same because we'd all had the same education. We'd all watched the same TV shows. We'd all grown up together. So I wasn't different to my friends other than my skin color. Whereas going to a town like Slough, where it's a big mix of people, there's expectation that you've got to be similar to them, even though I wasn't. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at now. I want my children to just be themselves, and if they speak well, good. If they don't, then I'll be on their case. Yeah. Lorraine.
I definitely agree with what both of you had just said. I was just thinking that a lot of the time, people have stereotypes that they follow from social media, from movies, things like this. And they kind of, and I'm not just saying this is for a specific type of people, it comes with everyone. It's just human nature that you see this on TV and you're like, oh, so that's what it must be like, you know? And I remember speaking to my dad, and he was saying about how if, he always used gym examples, but he just said that if a Black guy was to go into a gym and say he's 6'2", regular guy, you know, but he's like really tall, and he just started talking to some other people in the gym, and they said, oh, so what do you do as a job? and he said, oh, I'm a brain surgeon. And they'd be like, oh, I thought you were a basketball player. Because that's what people think that all Black people do, is you just play sport. Because apparently that's all we can do, is just play sport. You run fast and that's it, you know? So people definitely have stereotypes, and it's the same with me. Like, you feel like you start questioning, should I be like those stereotypes? But then even as well with when I used to work in a cafe, and it was mainly like more posh people that went to this cafe, and I found myself a lot of the time changing how I speak, because I feel like when you sound like them, you're more likely to be taken seriously. And I just came with the whole feeling of, this isn't my home, you know, like, this is their home and I'm in their home, and I need to fit in with them. They need to accept me. So I definitely do think that it influenced my identity a lot, even just throughout primary school. Like I said before, like, anything the other kids did, I did, because I thought that's what you do to fit in, you know. I was straightening my hair twice a day. I got my ears pierced. I was wearing the same things they were wearing, because I thought that's what I need to do to fit in. And then going to secondary school, that's when more of the stereotypes were put onto me. And I don't know how, I couldn't tell you how many times I've been called an Oreo, you know, black on the outside, white on the inside. I couldn't tell you how many times I've been called that. And I've had friends' parents even make comments on how I look, because there's ideas of how every Black person is supposed to look, apparently. But it's really a lot of pressure that I don't think people realize they're actually putting onto us. Even when when I was younger, and people used to come around my house for a sleepover or just for dinner or something, and I would say, oh, my dad's going to be there. So, where's your dad from? And I say, he's from Jamaica. And they say, oh, I bet your dad's a proper Rasta man. I bet you're always playing Motown. It's like, you're going to be disappointed. Let's just say it straight, you're going to be disappointed. Yeah, okay, there may be some elements of that culture that may be in the house, but it's not the idea that you have in your head. So just calm down a bit, you know? But yeah, it's definitely, I 100% would say that it's definitely influences your identity, especially from a young age.
I'm not too sure if I can speak on identity being impacted growing up in a rural area. I can just talk about identity being impacted on growing up as Black, if that makes sense. And what I would say is that I was going to say, there was so much I wanted to say. When I was in uni, I was president of the African Caribbean Society. So that pretty much started me on my path. And then I know that my dad was what you call pro-Black now, and he does, you know, he's a Black historian, he's a genealogist, he does so much stuff around Black history, and I've got a lot of that from him. So that's something that I talk on and I speak on a lot. And with a lot of the work that I do with young people, particularly young Black people, then I'm about educating yourself and being aware and knowing about your history and recognizing that our history doesn't start with slavery, you know, and it doesn't even start 5,000 years ago, it doesn't even start 9,000 years ago. You know, we can really start to dig deep and find out exactly the excellence that we come from. So when we talk about Black excellence has always been part of our story and our history, so to speak. So for me, it's just is what it is. Going to the geek thing, or being told that you speak really well, I can do both. I can speak really well, supposedly. I can go into meetings with high profile people, with, you know, chief execs and executive directors and heads of police and heads of council departments, because that's the type of work I do, hold my own and be able to talk, as they call it, elaborated code. But I can also speak the restricted code because I work with young people. And what I've recognized as well is the way that I talk, particularly growing up in the area of Manchester that I'm from, around with my peer group, so to speak, we recognize that youth subculture anyway is kind of like heavily influenced by Black culture, is heavily influenced by Jamaican and African culture. aka David Starkey in 2011, when he said, we've got all of these kids running about London with these fake Jamaican accents. but that's literally what it is. They call it, what is it, multilingual London Ebonics or something like that now. But what I'm saying is, I've been called a geek, I've been called an Oreo, I've been called, oh, you think you're too nice, or you think you're too speaky spokey. That's definitely impacted on my identity as a Black person, but also as a woman. And thinking to myself, that intersectionality, like, okay, as a woman, should I really be so outspoken? Should I be so confident? Should I, you know, and then wrestling with that for a long time and then recognizing, well, no, because if I dim my light, then how am I, you know, what am I doing for myself, so to speak? And then how can I morally and ethically go out there and work with young Black girls, particularly, to get them to shine and empower their, you know, embrace their greatness if I'm not doing the same thing? So I've definitely been through hills and valleys, forgive the pun, when it comes to my identity. It's helped that I was able to shape that identity autonomously whilst I was at university, exploring my African Caribbean roots, being president of the ACS, and very similar to your experience, I think, Amon, when you're saying it was very London centric, but then coming back to Manchester and just really being able to explore that. And just being unapologetic. I've recognized now I'm unapologetic. I recognize that Black and white as identity, as races are constructs. So even though I don't really like to subscribe to that, but I recognize in certain spaces and places, if you use the word Black, then it means something, you know, whether it be politically Black or ethnically, whatever it may be. But my identity is so nuanced and I have a myriad of identities, if that makes sense. And it depends where I am. Ultimately, you know, we can't get away from this melanin drip. I'm Black and that's it. And it's taken me a long time to embrace it and to recognize, with all the geekdom, all the excellence, all the empowerment, all of the crazy hobbies and interests that I have, that other Black people are like, well, that's not the Black standard. But this is my standard, you know, and this is me. And I think that is where our power lies as people, just embracing all of it. That's it.
Absolutely.
I would just follow that up and say, particularly in the context of what's gone on in 2020, in terms of the upsurge of I guess this movement globally around Black issues and all the rest of it. My sincere hope is that at the very least, what it does is that it encourages or gives young Black people growing up in Western societies the confidence to speak up and stand up whenever they do experience racist things. Because I'm thinking again to how I was as a child, and when my identity was still forming and it was still, basically in development. There are things that, things that happened, for example, when I started working, or even when I was at school, secondary school, where for example, I had a school friend basically ask a biology teacher whether Black people were further behind in terms of evolution than white people. So those kinds of instances, right? Looking back, I think it was a point that Amon had mentioned, right? That when you're growing up in a white-dominated space, your overarching concern or desire is just to fit in. So you end up just kind of going along with what people say. And even, basically, I have this regret that I could have done a lot more and been a lot more, I guess, outspoken and strong in terms of defending myself and in terms of speaking up whenever things like that happened, as opposed to what actually happened, which was just me, me expressing some kind of protest, but really just playing the role of, quote unquote, the good Black guy who doesn't really express any kind of, I don't even know what the word is, any kind of big opposition to what's going on. So as I said, in the context of what's going on this year, my sincere hope is that young Black people growing up in rural areas or white-dominated spaces and all the rest of it, that they would definitely feel a lot more confident in terms of speaking up and standing up for themselves. Because, as I said, looking back at my life, it took me, when I think back at the things that have happened to me, I would respond to it in a totally different way now than I did when I was a teenager or a young person. So
I think definitely being able to explore identity is such a privilege that a lot of white people do take for granted. We don't get to do that. We don't get to say, actually, I want to try new styles or this element of myself. It's like you kind of way for me go into the whole, I need to do everything in my power to disguise what I have been blessed with. And one of the biggest things that I don't like to regret, but I look back on and I'm very sad about, is that the amount of time and the priority I put on disguising myself. And I remember it felt like such a need. As soon as I went into high school, I had a big, beautiful afro that I could not disguise. And my mum said, there is no way you are putting heat on it, covering it. And I said, Mum, please. And it was such a priority for me. Like that was all I could think about. Like, please, can you let me? Because it was every single day at school, it was just all about my hair, and it distracted from my learning. And so I spent all of high school with my beautiful afro in the sun, trying to cover it as much as possible, but it didn't matter how it was, people would still be commenting. And later on in high school, when I got locks, I thought that actually it would probably be less now, because it's not afro and it kind of, gravity goes downwards. Maybe they'll like that more. And I think I had to realize, no matter what I do, I cannot hide my African features. And I think it was very difficult, because I used to have every day at school. So there would, of course, be the bullying side of things, which was racist. And then it was kind of, you know what, Lana, you look so much better if you did this or you did that. None of it was saying, you look beautiful the way you already are. And yeah, I think that was really, really difficult, and having to go to great efforts to articulate myself in a certain way, and people being really shocked by that. And through my volunteering, I volunteer on a project, What's Up, which stands for Women Against Sexual and Violence Speak Up, which is a youth social action project based in Ipswich. And we predominantly create toolkits educating young people and professionals against things like gang grooming, domestic abuse, exploitation. And we deliver these to, when I have been part of delivering these to things like the safeguarding board and professionals, this pressure to make sure, okay, don't get too passionate. They might perceive that a certain way. Don't get too loud, and make sure you speak like this, and then being like, shocked if I'm able to say certain words and stuff. And so, that's really, really difficult. And I think finally, definitely in high school, there was a change. I think the Kylie Jenner era, when she and suddenly it was, actually, Lana, like, I want your lips now, or I want these certain features of you, but you don't want the struggle nor the culture that comes with that.
Yes.
So, and I know that, especially as a woman, it is not a compliment for me, and it never did feel like that, especially when kind of males would say, oh, this part of you is so nice, and it kind of felt like, you're not really appreciating me though. And that was really difficult. And I'm now so proud that I am a Black woman, and I stand in my Blackness proudly every single day, trying to make up for all those days that I was made to feel ashamed for that. And also try and hide it, but so you're not actually part of us, and you are different, and that is not okay. And I think, yeah, it's, and the questions like, how much are you of this and you of that, and I'm not a cake. I feel whole. I am a Black woman, and I don't want those kind of questions of what actually are you, and things like that, which again I let slip far too often. Yeah. So I think the next question would be kind of looking into our experiences of school and education. Really interesting. We've touched on it, but does anyone want to speak about their experience in education?
I'm massive on that. I've just been listening to Akala's book, Natives, and I'm listening to, I think it's chapter 4 and 5, where he speaks about school and education. And I've done a lot of work in Manchester around decolonising education. And a really cool report has just come out by an organisation that I do a lot of partnership work with called Kids of Colour. And they've just released a report around decriminalising the classroom, it's called, and it's how Black and brown children are criminalised in the classroom and how they are perceived and treated based upon bias and years of, dissonance and basically racist practices and in the education system. I'm very, very big on it because I am an educationalist. A lot of people think that youth workers just, get about playing pool and drinking tea in a youth club. It's more than that. It's an actual professional, vocation. I had to go to uni to study for this. It's not, and I fight a lot with a lot of teachers around that. I go into schools, I do youth work, I do counselling, I do coaching, I do therapeutic and social and wellbeing interventions. A lot of teachers see youth workers as like the poor stepchild. A lot of social workers see us as the poor stepchild. But when it comes to informal education, when it comes to moral, social, intellectual, economic, and spiritual development of young people, this is where we step up, and this is where we supplement and augment the stuff that isn't taught in schools, particularly for those young Black and brown children who are going to be stigmatized and who are going to be treated less favorably because of literally the color of the skin and this age-old historic belief that, Black and brown children are inherently inferior, that they inherently have less intelligence. And this comes from, we know where it comes from. It comes from the medical model. It comes from eugenics. It comes from this crazy propagandist attempt, 400-year-old doctrine of trying to make it so that Black people are seen as less than human. So that the system as we see it now, capitalism, which spawned transatlantic slavery and all of those things there, can be deemed as appropriate, So for me, I think education as it stands is not fit for purpose. I don't think it works for the Black child. I think a massive overhaul is needed. And when we talk about supplementary schools that we had in the 70s and the 80s, which started in London by a person I personally know, Professor Gus Strachan, in 1971, after I think it was Bernard Cord, he wrote a book, the miseducation of the Caribbean child in educationally subnormal schools. And then we have the supplementary schools, and it's something that I'm trying to kind of like champion in Manchester and UK. We've just set up our own educational services to try and respond to it, because we recognise that alternative education and supplementary schools for Black and brown children is pretty much non-existent. And we also recognise that if we want our Black children to be excellent and to embrace their full identity, then we can't rely on the schooling system to do that, because they're inevitably going to fail. And the last point I wanted to say is means testing for children. Carla was saying, and I looked into this and I've heard this statistic before, that at the age of 5, when children go into school and they're means tested by the local authority, it was found in 60 local authorities that were consulted during this study in 2000 that a large percent of the Black children came in operating at a higher academic level than the rest of their peers. But by the time they got to 8, 11 and into high school, they'd fallen behind over 21%, if that makes sense, compared to the rest of the peers. Now that cannot be, that can't be a symptom of Black children, i.e., does that make sense? It has to be something else. And there's a lot more to speak on, and I could speak on a lot more, and I'm super passionate about it, so I'll shut up. But yeah, that's just me. Not fit for purpose. We need to make our own schools.
Yeah.
That's it.
Can I jump in on that? I think the curriculum is a massive thing that must be completely changed. It's not a little like, oh, we'll change a few aspects. It's completely. Now, growing up, especially in a rural area, one of the main issues was that I was being taught about my history by white teachers. Now, I completely appreciate that we have many white people that stand in solidarity with us and that genuinely have educated themselves and want to empower us. But still, for me as a young Black woman, I needed to see at the front telling me about who I am and my people, a Black woman or a Black man that I could feel comfortable with and relate to. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable every time Black history was brought up, because then it's everyone would turn to you. Everyone is suddenly asking you like you've been there. And certainly with the way Black history is, it is not positive. Why are we not learning about the positive Black history that is so rich and has existed, as Angeli was mentioning, way beyond the period in which our people were once enslaved? And that's another thing. We say our terminology is so wrong. You know, African people were slaved, and it's kind of like missing the fact that we were people and we were so much more than slaves.
Yeah.
Even saying the phrase slave trade, I don't like the word trade because it implies that this was a consensual swap of goods. No, it was people that were forced to leave their homes. And I think there needs to be an overhaul of that, because actually that isn't empowering to learn about that. And I think as well, in terms of white teachers, in rural areas, I understand if you cannot employ Black teachers, that's one thing that needs to be changed. But number two, you then have a massive responsibility to make sure that your Black children that are a part of your school do feel included. And I remember the bullying that I was experiencing, and I didn't know how to correctly handle it, and I didn't like it, and I shouldn't have had to go through it at all. But I remember sometimes when I would just boil up, because it was like, we're in the middle of a lesson and everything is just constant banter towards me. And I remember I once got sent out of the classroom, and I was so mad. I was like, how are you sending me out when they are in there being racist? And this white teacher not only didn't understand, but she was saying, calm down, and I think you're getting very aggressive, don't know why you're taking this so seriously. And it was really detrimental to my growth. And then it led me to kind of think, maybe I am being too dramatic. Maybe I do need to just laugh and take it. And that's really, really problematic. So yeah, I think there needs to be an overhaul of the education system, because it completely informs not only the Black children, but children of all other cultures on who we are. And they know that we are strong and we were amazing and we have always been excellent. And we are so much more than a community that was once enslaved. And also, we still need to know that that still impacts us today, because I remember being, you know, but Lanai, slavery's finished now. Like, okay, don't think you really understand the implications that still has in 2020. So yeah.
I think the connection between you know, the education system and one's own personal racial identity is quite interesting, because thinking back, when I was at school in Bedfordshire, or even when I later moved to Kent, I can't remember being taught anything really about Black or African history outside of Black people were once slaves and then they were freed, and Martin Luther King happened. And that was basically it. And thinking about it, it's, you know, even in terms of being taught, for example, about the British Empire, I think the problem is that when one is in a school environment in the UK, you obviously you learn all about, you know, British history and all the rest of it, but in terms of, for example, the abuses of the British Empire, all of that kind of stuff, it's not really delved into, such that you come away from your education, as I said, with the idea that, okay, basically Black people didn't contribute much to history at all, because we weren't taught that. And basically Britain played a leading role in ending the slave trade, and we have nothing to really excavate in terms of our role in terms of colonialism, or in terms of just how the world is. And like, there's no there's no need for us as British people to really be reflective about the legacy of colonialism or empire or anything like that. So, you know, I have a friend actually who, when I first met this person, wasn't really aware about any of the broader questions about, you know, the legacy of colonialism or the British Empire or any of the abuses that happened and all that kind of stuff. And he was just very, you know, Britannia rules the waves and just very, you know, set in his ways. And it was only after he actually began to read books that I suggested he read and that his girlfriend suggested that he read. It kind of changed his whole perspective, right? And I feel, as I said, when I was in school, in terms of my identity, it was something, going back to something that I was saying before, that it was almost as though I had to prove to everyone that I was not like the Black people that they read about in, you know, in terms of slavery or in terms of the civil rights movement, or I wasn't what the Black people that they saw on the TV in the adverts for like Africa or whatever. I was like cool Andrew that you could go on a bike ride with, and I was just like you basically. So yeah, I definitely think that there is a very close interplay between what the kind of subliminal messages that you're getting from the curriculum in the school and how you see yourself, and how also white English kids see themselves. Because as I said, I can't remember being taught anything, for example, about you know, British abuses in the British Raj in India or in Africa or anything like that. It was just, you know, everything was all hokey pokey, or everyone was just good. So yeah.
Okay, I think I'm the last one. Yeah. What was the question originally?
Sorry. So it was experiences of our education. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I don't recall being taught anything, just like Delapo mentioned. I think the level of education that I got at school related to Black people would have been slavery and definitely civil rights, Rosa Parks. But I would say I was very fortunate that my parents constantly, not even like it was just normal to discuss things at home. Talked about independence of Ghana from Great Britain and different world leaders, Mugabe and people like that. So I had an element of, I wouldn't even say an understanding, but I was aware of things that were happening around the world. But I didn't learn them from school at all. So, I mean, to be fair, at the time, I didn't even know that I needed to learn something different. I think, once again, in hindsight, looking back, thinking, you know, I wasn't taught that at school. I don't think my children are taught much at school nowadays. So I think the emphasis needs to be on what's put into your child's mind outside of those experiences. I go into schools with my colleagues, and, you know, we try and do as many workshops as we can on identity. I mean, it doesn't change the education system at all, but the small little bits that you can go and have a consultation with a group of young Black children and discuss the things that they're going through, and finding out who it is that they would want to go and talk to if there was a problem in the school. And I think they're the little things that need to be addressed, is that I grew up with just being a child. I wasn't a Black child, I was just a child. And the needs of Black children and Asian children and white children, everyone has a unique need. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed now. It can't be just this homogenized education system, because someone benefits and others lose out. So if there was anything that I could do, it would be to make sure that there was far more widespread education that wasn't just, we're great, that's why we're called Great Britain. I think like 2020, like we've talked about, I think has highlighted that British history isn't as glamorous as it sounds. And yeah, I think that's probably been a big shock for a lot of people. And I almost think that that's reason for the people repelling BLM, for instance, because they don't want to hear that they're not the one anymore. It's like you've gone your whole life thinking that you're the best in the world, and it's proved that you're not. So I know we're running out of time, so I'll move on.
Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Sorry? Lauren. Sorry.
I think there's so much that's just missing from history books. I mean, if I did say before, I'm only 17, and I took history for GCSE, so that was like 2-3 years ago, and it was maybe like 5 pages of the history book was about Black history, and like you all said before, it's slavery, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, and that's it. But I'm not saying any way that they weren't amazing people and they didn't do amazing things, but there's so many more people that we could talk about, you know. And one thing that I always was really fascinated by was about ancient Egypt, because there's still this ongoing discussion about if they were Black or not.
Yeah.
And it's
shocking.
People need to get on my dad's course. He can tell you all about that. Listen.
Yeah.
It's just so confusing to me, even when I think I'm not gonna lie, the first time I heard about it was, I think, on a Beyonce song when she was saying about knocking the nose off the pharaoh.
Yes, yeah.
Like, why don't they have a nose? And I remember I asked my history teacher once, and she said she wasn't sure, but she said maybe it's just to do with how they're old, you know, the nose sticks out, so maybe it just fell off. And so I was like, oh, okay. And then it wasn't until I was watching a video from Akala as well the other day that he went into detail about how it's just been, they basically just don't want to admit that Black people can create something so monumental that they just decide to completely hide it. And I just think that's so crazy. There's just so much more that people could learn about, and it's just quite upsetting that we have to learn these things in our own time when it's something that everyone should be learning, you know. Like, I had to learn about Mary Seacole. She's my girl, like, I love her, you know, and people don't know who she is. And I just find that like so upsetting how Florence Nightingale gets all the attention when really, like, she cleaned some floors, but what did Mary Seacole do? She was on the front line, you know. There's just
talk the thing.
I mean, even with my history exam, people were coming out the exam, and we had 1 4-mark question on Black history in the whole paper, and people were coming out the exam saying that 4-marker was the only one I had confidence writing because you talk about it so much. I actually knew what to say. And I was like, well, now you need to not tell me to shut up and get over it anytime I talk about it, because I'm pretty sure you'd kick up a fuss if I mentioned the Holocaust or 9/11. If I told you to get over it, that'd be, whoa, I'd be cancelled in seconds, you know what I mean? So I think there just needs to be way more added. And I know that when there's history books made about 2020, then there's no chance they're going to be able to skip anything. We're going to be like, look, I've got the receipts. Let me show you this video real quick of when I was at the protest, you know? Like, so yeah, I just think there's so much more that can be added.
Definitely. And I think it shouldn't, as you said, it shouldn't be on our parents and families to have to take additional time to educate us at home. They should have confidence that when we go to school, we will learn just like the white children get to about their culture. And I think Amon's point about how, you know, all different kinds of cultures, they have different needs, exactly why I don't agree with the term BAME, because all of those communities are so different in so many different ways. And we can't, I feel a lot of the time in rural areas, again, the white community, they feel comfortable with the white and the other and tick box BAME. But no, because there's so many differences, and we can't kind of try and narrow us down and put us in a box. So I'd also just like to say thank you to everyone that's put such kind comments in the Q&A box and is relating and is interested. We really appreciate it. I think I'd like to finish with all of us maybe talking about some positives. You know, is there anything you're doing right now to tackle racism in your communities? Tell us about, just let's end with some positives.
Okay, so I can start. So first of all, thank you all very much for having me on. It's been really lovely speaking about my experiences. In terms of what's going on at the moment, I have a very close friend of mine here in Canada who is setting up basically what she calls a salon, which is basically an online forum where Black people, not only just in Canada but around the world, can come together and basically talk about their experiences, kind of uplift each other, provide support to each other, and particularly, what with everything that's going on in the world, talking, for example, about how they're navigating racial progress, I guess, in their workplaces, in their personal lives, and so on. So that's, I can do a quick plug for that. It's, I think the first one, well, it happened earlier in the year, but we're restarting it again. And it'll be on Saturday from, I think, 3 p.m. UK time. I think the Instagram to follow is called the Black Collective. So if you're interested, that's something that's going on at the moment. But yeah, as I said, it has been really wonderful being on with everybody. And yeah.
Fantastic. For myself, I work for an organisation. I've been a youth worker for about 25 years, but I work for an organisation that we go into schools. We do regular youth work, but I deal with the education side of things, and we go into schools and try and really offer an alternative, I guess, a pushback. Some schools are aware that there's children within their classes that need outside help that they can't necessarily provide. And so that's where we fit in. We try and talk about identity. I mean, I go into schools and there'll be a child who's half Slovakian, half Jamaican, half Zimbabwean, and then half Romanian. And it's interesting because all of those children are going to have needs that aren't run of the mill. And so we're able to tailor a lot of what we do in terms of how people came to the UK, migration, what contributions people have made to the country. And so rather than just having the immigrants that come over here to take your jobs, we try and really prove to them the contributions, things like fish and chips or things that we might consider totally British, and then we discover that they were an immigrant from somewhere that's brought that over here, and now we consider it English. So that's the positives that I do in my day-to-day life. And I still carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. So yeah, if you see me, I'm trying to represent every Black person in the world. That's where I'm at. Thank you. And yeah, it's good to see you all as well.
I'm currently working with my local youth workers, and we're still in the early stages, but we're making plans of creating not only a safe space for Black, Asian and Indigenous people in the area, to keep conversation going and having somewhere to go, other people with similar experiences to them to go to and help them out in any situation they need, and also to keep the conversation going about these tough conversations that people are now thankfully starting to have. And we're also hoping to be talking to the local police as well about police brutality and, how what they do can really impact our mental state as well.
Wonderful. Angeli?
So do you want to know what I'm currently doing?
Why? Whatever you like.
All right. I'm doing so much. So I'll be really honest. We speak about Black Lives Matter, but we also have lived through, this pandemic, and it's massively impacted people in different ways. Clearly, there's been some negatives in terms of our losses and our bereavements and the disproportionality of how it's affected Black and brown communities. But there's also been massive opportunities, whether it be collectively or personally. For me, it's given me the opportunity to, again, really start to, I love the word, excavate my own identity and dig deep, but also have those conversations with my peer groups and other groups around me that I work with. And because of the work that I do as a Black youth worker, I recognise that Black youth work across the board is what it is, but I also recognise that there has to be a nuance and there has to be a cultural competency around it when dealing with Black young people in particular. whether it be police brutality, which Lauren touched upon. We've done some amazing work around that with some of our partners in Manchester, whether it be around education, whether it be around health inequalities, all of those things there. But just recognising that there needs to be a culturally competent approach to youth work. So I've set up a Black Youth Worker Network in Manchester. I'm doing loads of work with other regional organisations who represent BAME, even though we hate that word, but you know, youth workers, and just really trying to champion, advocate and enable Black youth workers in Manchester in particular to do youth work and to do it in a way in which they aren't challenged or impeded in any way, and really trying to put youth work on the map as a professional vocation and not just something that, you know, somebody does on a Friday night. What else are we doing? Loads of other stuff, but yeah, if people want to know about the stuff that my dad does, he runs an organisation called Black History Inspires, and you can just Google it, Black History Inspires, and he certainly inspires me. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Just quickly, during the pandemic and the murder of our brother George Floyd, I decided to try and do something with my volunteering. We have a mini youth social action group who I was doing online sessions with, because obviously the pandemic was really difficult for them. So I was doing dance and quizzes, but I decided as a predominantly group of Black and brown children that I wanted to empower them. So I taught them about the Bristol bus boycott because they need to know about the UK movement.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at what Africa was like in 1453 and before, our kings and queens, our riches, and just trying to show them what school might not teach them. And yeah, just trying to, you know, empower them. I'm also part of the Suffolk Black Community Forum, which aims to educate, empower and enrich our community to benefit all people, which is really exciting. And yeah, I'm just trying to, you know, do as much as I can, but I think people forget there is so much pressure on us to educate everyone and have to experience all of these completely unacceptable inequalities which people think just don't exist, and they do. And I think, yeah, just a message to all of my Black people out there that just look after yourself and don't put that pressure on yourself to have to do everything and help everyone. You know, just really care for yourself because you're so important. And yeah, I just worry that, you know, there's so much pressure and not healthy for us. And to the white people out there, please do your bit and take time in your personal time to educate yourself. Don't ask us the questions, please, because often they can come out in a way, even if you mean them well, that isn't. So yeah, just take some responsibility for yourself, I guess. I think there is a question here, which we could, for organisations that look after rural spaces and want to make sure that is somewhere Black young people, they belong, and that is their space too. Do you have any advice on how those organisations could encourage engagement?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
Of course. So for kind of rural spaces, organisations that are in rural spaces, do you have any advice for how they could engage our communities in particular and Black young people?
Wouldn't necessarily call it an idea. Sorry, who was going to answer?
No, you go, Hannah. You go, sis.
I know that with the work that I'm doing as a youth worker and also as a director of TAP and also working closely with Black Girls Hike, we recognise that during the summer, because we had some tragedies in our community, we had some violence and there was a lot of trauma going on with some of our young Black people. And I was a massive advocate of saying, let's get these young people out into nature, because when we talk about trauma-informed approaches, first of all, we need to bring them to a place of safety and stability. So we've been having conversations with Black Girls Hike to create Black Youth Hike, because we know that once we take young people into nature, not only will it start to decompress some of that stress and that trauma that, you know, is being visited on them from all different areas, but it will also start to open the eyes experientially, can never say that word, to recognizing, oh, this is a rural green space. I can actually access this. I might come again. I'm going to tell my friends, when can I go again? And it starts to open up the floodgates and this perception to say, this is mine. Let me go again. So that's the type of work that I'll be doing from the ground up and really getting young Black people involved in physically going out there.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I think we are running over, but if anyone else has anything to mention, and then we can wrap up. Yeah.
I just wanted to answer two questions which had come up in the Q&A. So first of all, there was a question asked about the books that I had recommended to my friends. So obviously, one of them was Black and British by David Olusoga, I think his name is. And then the second one was a book called Britain's Gulag, The Brutal End of Empire in Kenya by a lady called Caroline Elkins. So those were really helpful in terms of allowing him to open his eyes a bit. There was another question that I saw about any advice that I would give to third culture kids, basically growing up in a rural space and wanting to leave behind their rural areas. And I would definitely say that, you know, first and foremost, you should not feel that you are in any way less Black for having grown up in a rural area. You have to be as confident and as proud as you can be about your own identity. And at the end of the day, it's only through fully embracing whatever idiosyncrasies that you have that you can really, I guess, other people can really respond to who you truly are. So I would definitely say, you know, be confident in yourself and then obviously embrace any opportunity that you have to leave behind your hometown and see the world and all the rest of it. And just on that point, I can definitely say that since coming to Canada, I've grown in so many ways that I never really thought possible. So there you go, that's what I'd say.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd also just, like to quickly mention that we must remember in these rural areas that Black communities have existed in these areas from the 1940s and before. My own grandmother came over from Ghana in 1948 as an 18-year-old and began her nursing career. And we must remember and value the contributions our Black communities have made generations ago and still are now. You know, we haven't just come to rural areas now, we've always been there and we deserve to be there. And yeah.
I love it.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to say a huge thank you to the entire panel. I think we could continue this conversation for hours and hours, but it's been really, really interesting to sit in and just hear about your experiences and hear about what we could be doing to improve the lived experience of young Black people in rural spaces. We've had a few questions in the Q&A function, and we'll definitely try and follow up on those questions with our amazing panel, sort of get those answers to you, get any organizations or books or recommendations over to you. I just want to say that the recording for this webinar will be up on our social media channels tomorrow morning. So if you missed any nuggets that you want to go rewatch or share with anyone, it will be on our social channels. A huge thank you to the panel. We'll be having another Young and Black webinar next week, so please tune into that, anyone. But also follow the hashtag Young and Black on Twitter, Instagram, or social platforms to continue the conversation. But thank you so much. It's been really interesting and amazing to have you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome. Well done.
Thank you.